is on Sri Lanka. For 3 days in mid-November, representatives of 54 countries will descend on Colombo for the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. These take place every 2 years, but this one is proving very controversial. It's 4 years since Sri Lanka's war against Tamil Tiger rebels came to an end, but its human rights record remains in the spotlight. Many campaigners say unless there is a full war crimes investigation, Sri Lanka should not be the venue. Some of the strongest criticism has come from the Canadian government. Well, the abuse claims centre on the final months of the conflict in 2009, when as many as 45,000 people died while trapped in a small pocket of land in northern Sri Lanka. In May that year, the Sri Lankan government declared victory over the Tamil Tigers after 26 years of violence. Barely 6 months later, Britain's then Prime Minister Gordon Brown proposed Sri Lanka as the host of the 2013 Commonwealth meeting. The UN Human Rights Council has since pushed Sri Lanka to investigate allegations of abuses by government forces. Sri Lanka's UN representative said the matter was blown out of proportion and blamed violence on what it called extreme elements. Well, this is the subject of today's Impact debate. With me in the studio is Francis Harrison, former BBC correspondent in Sri Lanka and the author of a book about the civil war called Still Counting the Dead. Joining us live also are Hugh Segal, the Canadian government's envoy to the Commonwealth, and Lal Wickrematunge from the Sunday Leader newspaper. His brother, the paper's editor, was shot dead in Colombo 4 years ago. Lal Wickrematunge, your family has clearly paid a big price in Sri Lanka's recent history. Do you think that your country is the right venue for this Commonwealth summit?
I think it's time the international community stood up and took notice. The heads of governments meeting for the Commonwealth being held in Sri Lanka should be held and could be used as a platform to urge the Sri Lankan government to correct itself. Now we have 2 UN resolutions and the LLRC report which the government has itself initiated, and I think it would be a good platform to bring the government around to implement those which they themselves have recommended.
So just to be clear, you think it's all right for the summit to take place in Sri Lanka as long as it's used as some kind of leverage on your government?
There are 2 points of view. One is the international community is very slow to react. If you look at the past records of other countries which have been brought to book, it has taken as much as 10 years. So unless there is a change of mind with the international community, that action has to be taken quickly instead of at the pace they are used to, then the question arises whether you should have the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting here, or whether Sri Lanka should be notified to get their act together as far as war crimes or human rights record is concerned.
And we're talking about this today because it's less than 6 months to go till that event. Hugh Segal in Kingston, Ontario, your government seems to have really gone out on a limb on this issue, calling for the venue of the summit to be rethought. Why is it so important to you?
Well, the Government of Canada is a very strong believer in the Commonwealth Charter. We're a very strong believer in the principles, the underlying values of the Commonwealth, such as democracy, rule of law, religious freedom, and in our view, really since the end of the war in 2009, what has been going on in Sri Lanka is heading in the opposite direction. There's been a clear imposition upon judicial independence with the impeachment of the Chief Justice in a fashion that is clearly unconstitutional. There is a continued army occupation of the north in a way which doesn't allow the vast majority of Tamils to rebuild their lives in any kind of reconciliation fashion. We have the continuing harassment of journalists, which includes murder and disappearances, the white vanning of people, and there is no indication, and I was there in Sri Lanka to do a fact-finding mission, meeting with all sides, in the debate. There is no indication of any movement at all in any meaningful way on the question of accountability for what happened at the end of the war. So on that basis, our Prime Minister has said so far that he does not intend to be in Colombo, and as to the actual status of Canada with respect to the meeting, that is still a matter under determination.
I mean, the Sri Lankan government were invited to take part in this discussion, declined to do so. If they were here, they'd probably say something along the lines of, it's no business of yours.
Well, and I don't look at it from the point of view of the internal affairs of another Commonwealth country. Every Commonwealth country is independent and makes its own sovereign decisions. I look at it in terms of the integrity of the Commonwealth and what it stands for. We did not agree to have a meeting in Cape Town during the height of the pre-Mandela years. We had principles in that respect. We have had it with respect to other countries who have had to be asked to step out of the Commonwealth for brief periods of time.
Are you equating
like
this? Are you equating this with apartheid-era South Africa? Is that what you think is going on in Sri Lanka today?
I'm saying the same principles with respect to justice, the rule of law, and democracy should apply and should be applied evenly to all members of the Commonwealth, and we shouldn't be giving a pass, particularly when the evidence suggests that things are moving in the opposite direction.
Well, let me bring in Francis Harrison, our former correspondent.
Holding a meeting and chairing a meeting.
Yes, just let me get the view of Francis Harrison, who's written a book about this. Now, Francis, it's 4 years since this conflict came to an end. I mean, clearly the Sri Lankan government wants to put all of this into the past. But how much has changed if you are an ethnic Tamil living in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think it's still very problematic. We're just seeing people turning up in Britain as asylum seekers with appalling signs of abuse. People who've been, for example, branded on their backs with hot metal rods, and we're seeing like 31 of those cases so far, or women who've been held in police detention, who've been repeatedly gang raped simply because they're Tamil and they're suspected to have some link with the Tamil Tigers. And this is 4 years on. We're actually in a situation where most survivors from the war, even abroad in Britain, are too scared to come forward and say what actually happened to them, which is why I wrote a book, and many of the people in my book speak anonymously because they're scared there'll be reprisals against their family members back home.
Is it possible, though, that this is a moment to then cast a light, that in a sense the Commonwealth heads of government meeting is an opportunity?
Well, look at it the other way. It could be a way of legitimising a government whose leaders may well stand in the dock one day for war crimes and crimes against humanity. I mean, you can have it both ways. Yes, it may be an opportunity to open up some space for civil society groups, for protesters, but what will happen to them once the heads of government have left? That's the question.
Lal Wickrematunge, there is a process of reconciliation that is underway in Sri Lanka, and your government would say that that is a process that should be allowed to continue without outside interference. Is there a real effort, in your view, at reconciliation?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Explain why you say that.
I can't see it. It's not on the ground. The majority community are even divided on the issue. We can see the Sinhala Buddhist clergy getting involved. If you take all of that, I don't think genuine reconciliation is being seen on the ground now.
So, Hugh Segal, how are you actually going to deal with this? Is it confirmed that your Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, is going to boycott this summit then?
Well, I think what is confirmed is that the Prime Minister has yet to receive any information to indicate any meaningful movement on accountability or reconciliation. In fact, new information we have received, and our Ambassador for Religious Freedom has spoken on this, shows a pattern of right-wing, extreme Buddhist harassment of the Muslim community in a fashion which causes Canadians great concern. So we think this is headed in the wrong direction. Canada will make its position clear with respect to the Prime Minister's attendance, but I'm not aware of any change in policy as we speak.
And if you end up being alone on that, that's fine with you?
Canada will not be intimidated into going along to get along with a pack who don't seem to care about the core principles of the Commonwealth. We are honoured that our head of state, Her Majesty the Queen, will not be attending.
Yeah, well, we don't know that's actually the reason for it. She's not attending, but that could be for all sorts of other reasons. Francis, I mean, how uncomfortable do you think all this is going to be for the Sri Lankan government? I mean, we've known for a long time that they were going to host this summit, and yet suddenly it seems like the pressure's really building.
Well, I think, look at the fact they're not coming to take part in this debate, nor the Commonwealth. I think it's very uncomfortable, probably more for the Commonwealth than for the Sri Lankan government, which hopes it can whitewash what it's done in the past and legitimize itself, because obviously in terms of TV pictures and public imagination, they'll see heads of government shaking hands with the leaders of Sri Lanka. They won't see what happened in the past or what is going on under the surface now. So I think for the Commonwealth, it's a serious issue, and there are people in the Commonwealth organisations, various different groups, who are very concerned about the reputational damage Sri Lanka heading the Commonwealth will do to them, because obviously this will go on for 2 years.
Francis Harrison, Hugh Segal, Lal Wickrematunge, thank you very much for taking part in this discussion. Sri Lanka's High Commissioner to London is going to be joining us to respond to these points in another half an hour's time, so we'll bring you that interview live. And we also did ask the Commonwealth Secretariat to join this debate. They declined, but they did give us this statement. The Commonwealth acts collectively and by consensus. The heads of government decided in 2009 and confirmed in 2011 that their 2013 summit should be in Sri Lanka. That collective decision still stands, and the summit is scheduled to take place in the middle of November.